in Tennessee after the conviction. And we have with us Dr. ACharvet2, who is a sociologist and a person who has some information relative to what happens in capital defense cases and capital punishment cases after the individual has been convicted but not yet executed. And of course, Dr. ACharvet2, let's give you an opportunity to pick up at the point that we left off last time.
Well, I guess what's most important to me is that the theory that guides this work, social bonding theory, it's a theory that I utilized initially in my research to try to identify the elements of preventing and deterring domestic violence. And when I first began the work, the real issue around capital punishment became deterrence, or that's what one would hear a lot. And the harsher the punishment, according to this theory, is not the thing that deters crime. According to this theory, it's a stake in conformity that would deter crime. And those who have a stake tend to commit less criminal acts. And those with no stake in conformity tend to commit a lot of criminal acts and murders. And so primarily what I did initially on the way to trial was a study of the life course that identified elements of the social bond that would have deterred the crime or deterred the development of a criminal career. After the crime becomes another issue, because then you've got a long history of an individual living within a structured environment, and oftentimes a change in life, a change in all of the issues that led them to prison. So that's where this became a fascinating study for me, and it occurred to me that not only is this germane in terms of people facing death sentences, but it would also be significant in determining who was a good candidate for parole. And with the recidivism rate so irregular and high, I am convinced that there would be a way to study an individual
who has been incarcerated for a long period of time, and you could make some decision in terms of whether or not that individual ought to be given parole. I mean, would that be the outcome of such an activity?
If I were in a position to grant parole, there are questions I would want to have answered about that individual and about the social environment that I was returning that individual to live in, whether or not the debt had been paid, and whether or not that was the sentiment of the community that was about to receive the individual.
Now, but now, is it possible, and I think you introduced earlier off camera, what you call the governor's a formal paper that was written dealing with the governor of the state of Tennessee and parole and whatever. Why don't you explain that to our audience and as well as to myself this morning?
Guidelines for pardons, commutations, and reprieves. And essentially, we don't hear very much in Tennessee anymore about pardons. When I first came to Tennessee, there was a lot of information about pardons because there had been corruption and scandal. But it is statutorily identified that the governor, or actually it's the parole board's job to recommend, to make a non-binding recommendation to the governor. And so what I became interested in is how is it determined, and what factors are presented to the board, and whose responsibility is it to collect that information. I know that on a death penalty case, the responsibility is decided, and many services go to people who are facing death sentences that do not appear to be available to people who are, I call them terminal sentences, either a life without parole or a number of years that one couldn't possibly expect to live through.
To come out alive at the end of those years.
These are what I refer to as terminal sentences that essentially, in my opinion, lead to an increased danger within the prisons because they remove hope.
And not only that, they also keep incarcerated individuals who over a long period of time become ill and probably would be less an expense or less a burden on the state if they were somehow placed in another kind of setting outside of the being incarcerated. Would that be a fair assessment in terms of the age and criminal, death penalty population? Is that true?
I was informed yesterday that the cost of incarcerating an individual at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution is $65 a day, which is roughly $24,000 a year. Many of these individuals work, however, they don't receive realistic amounts of money, and I've always kind of viewed it that many of the people in prison actually work for their room and board and the rest of the facilities that they live in. But I think the point being is, if a study like this is going to be undertaken, where would the funding come from? So I started looking at the figures, and $24,000 a year is what it costs to keep an inmate incarcerated. And a mitigation or a clemency review would cost less than that. And if it saved taxpayers even 10 years, we would come out ahead.
And so you're only suggesting that there are some cases that you believe might be worthy of a review that are not capital punishment cases, but these individuals are there for life or without parole, and so that it might be less expensive on the part of the state to keep these individuals there. It might be better if perhaps they might be able to receive some kind of clemency or whatever kind of thing that perhaps the governor is in a position to offer through the parole board. Would that be
potentially, or perhaps legislatively we can address these issues? But what I'm saying is that we increase safety to not only the people within the prison by providing some kind of hope or a stake in conformity. We will increase safety to them, but also, and I think most importantly, to their children. 70% of which will follow their parent to prison.
And of course, let us, Dr. Charvet, take this second commercial break, after which we'll come by and give you an opportunity to continue that line of thought. And we'll be back with our audience following this very short commercial break.